What if you found yourself knee-deep in mud, surrounded by the screams of men who didn't have time to say goodbye? What if the chill in the air wasn't just the bite of an autumn wind, but the icy grasp of impending doom? The Battle of Agincourt was no mere footnote, it was a swirling vortex of chaos, glory, and the unmistakable stench of desperation. What would you do when faced with the roar of arrows descending like hellfire, each one carrying the promise of death or worse, disgrace? Picture this, a field transformed into a slaughterhouse, where the ground drinks the blood of the foolish and the brave alike. You're not just a soldier, you're a pawn, a fleeting shadow in a game played by giants. The English longbowmen, those ruthless archers with the precision of a surgeon and the hearts of feral beasts, claim their victims with each twang of their bows. The air vibrates with the sound of your heartbeat, thump, 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 like a war drum heralding your end. This isn't glory, it's a grim lottery where everyone loses. Why would you stand there, staring into the maw of madness? The French knights, resplendent in armor, are nothing but targets for arrows, and for every 10 who charge, 1 survives. The mud swallows boots, and the cries of the dying twist into a surreal symphony. You've never known fear like this, not in your wildest nightmares. It's not just about survival, it's about the gut-wrenching realization that you're the underdog in a fight between gods. Can you hear the laughter? The dark, twisted humor of fate as it plays its cruelest hand. One misstep, and you're not just dead, you're a forgotten face in a sea of corpses. Agincourt offers no mercy, no second chances. It's a brutal stage upon which the worst of humanity plays out its darkest desires. You think you can handle the chaos? Think again. The moment you step onto that blood-soaked earth, you're already marked. In this world where honor and bravery become mere collateral damage, would you choose the sword or the bow? Would you rise in rebellion against your fate, only to be felled by your own arrogance? A cruel joke awaits you, the battlefield is a master puppeteer, and you're just a marionette, dancing to the tune of death. And as the sun sets on that fateful day, will you be the hero immortalized in tales, or just another whisper lost to the winds? Agincourt isn't just a battle, it's a test of your will, your sanity, your very essence. The question lingers like a ghost, do you have what it takes to survive when all hope crumbles like dry leaves beneath your feet? Turn the page, if you dare. You might find that the truth is far more terrifying than the battle itself. The air hung thick with the stench of fear, an invisible fog cloaking the cobbled streets of London, where whispers danced in the shadows like ghosts. I remember that night, a chill, like 1,000 icy fingers, creeping up my spine. The clock struck midnight, the sound reverberating through the stone walls of the castle, a ghostly echo that warned of the storm brewing just beyond the horizon. In the dim light of the flickering torches, I stood there, heart pounding like a war drum. My thoughts were consumed by the looming spectre of conflict, a relentless wave threatening to crash over our fragile peace. I could see him, the figure of King Henry VI, slumped in despair, a shadow of the king he once was, lost in the labyrinth of his own mind. The crown, once so regal, now felt like a noose around his neck, strangling his will, and hope bled from him like a wound unhealed. Henry, I whispered, the name escaping my lips like a prayer. But did he even hear me? His eyes were vacant, clouded with the weight of a nation's burdens. How could he bear it? I could feel my own heart aching for his. The crown weighed heavy on the proud, the ambitious, but here was a king who could barely lift his head. I remember thinking, he was just a man caught in the throes of a tempest, battered by the storm of rivalries and political tensions that churned dangerously between England and France. And then there was Margaret, fierce and unyielding, a fiery spirit trapped in a gilded cage. I could see the flash of desperation in her eyes, the way she trembled with a wrath that begged to be unleashed. I will not stand idly by while our enemies circle, she had said earlier, voice steady yet laced with an edge. We will reclaim our legacy. Ruthless ambition coursed through her veins, and I felt it draw me in, like the force of a storm. Her determination ignited something deep within me, a mix of admiration and fear that twisted like a knife in my gut. But even as I stood there, in that crumbling world of shifting alliances and treachery, beneath the surface of ambition bubbled a darker truth. With every whispered conversation behind closed doors, with every meeting held in the shadows of dimly lit chambers, the clock ticked ominously towards war. I could almost hear its heartbeat, a silent countdown to chaos, as the spectres of the past whispered tales of vengeance and bloodshed. Out in France, Charles, the Dauphin, paced in his chamber, anxiety radiating from him like heat from a forge. I could see him wrestling with the mantle of leadership, grappling with the legacy of a fractured kingdom. "They cannot take what is ours," he declared, fists clenched as if he could crush the very air that separated us. But beneath the bravado lay a raw vulnerability, an unspoken fear of failing those who looked to him. I felt that fear. Had he not heard the rumors? Had he not felt the tremors of unrest creeping closer, like cold fingers wrapping around his throat? War, it was a beast that thrived in the darkness, and the air crackled with its imminent approach. Shadows flitted around us, each one a reminder of the rivalries that cut deeper than any sword. I could see betrayal etched in the faces of those who once swore loyalty, and I knew, this was just the beginning. "Do you not see?" Margaret's voice resonated, slicing through the tension like a blade. "We are stronger together, but alone? We will crumble. The French dare to defy us, to mock our suffering. This is our moment." She raised her fist, and I felt the rush of blood surge in my ears, the pulse of rebellion igniting hope and fear in equal measure. But what did I dare to hope for? I remembered the stories of valor and blood that danced across the pages of history. I remembered the laughter of children playing in meadows, so innocent, so unaware of the storms brewing at their doorsteps. Would they still laugh when the war drums, thud, 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 shattered their playful world? I could see it all unraveling, the threads of loyalty snapping like brittle twine under the pressure of ambition. The old and the young, the noble and the simple, all tossed into a cauldron of chaos that would boil over, spilling blood onto the streets like a macabre painting. And those who thought themselves mighty would fall. They did not know, the very air they breathed would become their shroud. The clouds billowed overhead, dark and ominous, as if the heavens themselves bore witness to our impending doom. I felt the chill creep deeper, penetrating my skin, settling in my bones. I remember thinking of the sacrifices, the lives that would be lost in the pursuit of power. I could almost hear the distant clash of swords, the cries of men on the battlefield, a symphony of agony and valor. And then I saw them, the faces of the fallen, their eyes pleading for justice long after their bodies had turned to dust. They haunted my thoughts, voices merging into a single, desperate cry for change. Did we dare to answer? Did we dare to stand against the tide of history, to forge a new path amidst the chaos? As the clock continued its relentless ticking, I felt the realization wash over me. This was not just a war for land or power, it was a war for the very soul of our nations. I could hear the tension crackle, a raw energy that pulled me taut, like the string of a bow ready to unleash its fury. War was coming, and all I could do was brace myself for the storm. In the flickering candlelight, I saw Henry's face twist with anguish, Margaret's eyes blazing with defiance, and Charles's shoulders hunched under the weight of his crown. The dawn approached, the dark clouds drawing nearer, and I realized with a deep, painful certainty that we were all locked in a dance with destiny, each step bringing us closer to the inevitable clash that would shatter the fragile world we called home. With every heartbeat, the tension built, an unrelenting tide that surged forth, dragging us all helplessly toward a fate we could neither comprehend nor escape. And as the night deepened, I felt the chill seep into my very soul. The prelude to war was a symphony of chaos, and we, each of us, were mere notes in a tragedy that was yet to unfold. A chilling fog hung heavy over the encampment, as if the very air around us knew the horrors that awaited. I stood at the edge of a makeshift wooden fort, my heart pounding like a war drum, reminding me of the blood-stained soil we would soon tread. The distant cries of men sharpening their swords echoed through the mist, a haunting symphony of determination and dread. We were not merely soldiers, we were the ghosts of dreams turned to ash, the remnants of hope clinging to our threadbare banners as the weight of dread pressed down upon us. I remember Thomas, a boy barely more than a man, with eyes that gleamed with a ferocity that belied his years. He was a blacksmith's son, his arms strong from hammering iron into swords, yet trembling now as he fidgeted with the hilt of his dagger, the blade still stained from our last skirmish. "What if we don't return?" he whispered, the terror in his voice a raw, jagged edge that cut deeper than any sword could. I wanted to tell him it was a silly thought, that glory awaited us. But there was no glory in the echoes of the past, only shadows that danced in the corners of my mind. And then there was Eleanor, fierce and unyielding, her spirit ablaze against the encroaching darkness. She was not a soldier in the traditional sense but had trained beside us, a resolve sharper than any arrow. I could see the fire in her eyes as she barked orders at the men, wielding her knowledge of the battlefield like a weapon. "We have no time for fear," she proclaimed, but I knew she felt it, woven into the very fabric of her being, a knot of anxiety she fought to untangle. Every step she took was a rebellion against fate itself. The English army was a tapestry of lives woven together by desperation and ambition. We were a mixture of nobility and peasantry, our blood the same hue of crimson, yet our aspirations danced in stark contrast. Young men filled the ranks, fresh faces eager to prove their valor, while the older soldiers wore the weight of battles past etched into their skin. Each soldier was a story, a heartbeat, a flicker of something that could be snuffed out in an instant by an enemy's blade. Training was a brutality wrapped in necessity. I remember the stench of sweat and the clang of metal as we battled not just each other, but the very spectre of death looming over us. For hours, we drilled with our bows, long, sinewy wood that felt like an extension of our own bodies. The thrum of the strings echoed in my bones as I released arrows into the air, each one a prayer to the gods for survival. The archers were the backbone, an imposing wall of fury, but even they felt the ghostly grip of fear. Every time we practiced, the cries of fallen comrades seemed to follow us, taunting, reminding us of the stakes, the very essence of mortality laid bare. "Form a line," the sergeant roared, the bark of his voice a whip slicing through the tension. We obeyed, hearts thrumming as we stood shoulder to shoulder, breath mingling with the cold air. The formation was a dance, an intricate choreography of bodies braced for the inevitable clash. But in the marrow of my bones, I felt the tremor of uncertainty. We were to face an enemy that seemed more spectre than man. They were the stuff of nightmares, a relentless tide of aggression. As the days dwindled to hours, our strategies took shape like a beast ready to pounce. We would employ the field, longbowmen lined against the horizon, a wall of death, infantry, shielded and steadfast. I could see it, the archers, like gods of war, raining chaos down upon our foes. It was perfect, and yet the shadow of doubt crept in, whispering, taunting. In those quiet moments before sleep, I wrestled with the weight of our choices. The night before the battle, sleep eluded me. I lay beneath the stars, each twinkling light an echo of dreams not yet realized. I listened to the men whispering fears and hopes into the darkness, each voice a solitary note in our collective symphony. I thought of Thomas, his boyish laughter mingling with the sound of swords clashing and blood spilling. I thought of Eleanor, the fire in her heart burning fiercely as she stared into the abyss of what was to come. "We fight for honor," I murmured, but the words felt hollow against the vast expanse of the universe. Would honor fill the void if I returned home without them? As I drifted into a restless sleep, shadows wrapped around me, curling like smoke, curling like the fate that awaited us at dawn. And as the first light pierced through the fog, illuminating our faces with a cold, unyielding clarity, I knew that we were not merely soldiers, we were the embodiment of every heart that beat in the name of survival. We were a mix of fear and courage, loss and longing, a living testament to the struggle that breathed through the ages. The thrum of destiny pulsed in the air, and I understood then, this was not just a battle, it was the heart and soul of what we were fighting for. The English army was a composition of courage, ignorance, and the grotesque beauty of our shared humanity. And as the sun rose, its light spilling across the canvas of the battlefield, I felt the pull of fate, an unbreakable bond that would tie us to the earth, to each other, and to the relentless march of history. In those fleeting moments, before the clash of steel and the cries of agony began, we were alive. And when the dust settled, when the echoes of war faded into the horizon, we would still be a part of this tapestry, woven into the very fabric of time, forever echoing the spirit of those who dared to stand. The echo of gunfire shattered the stillness of the dusk, a sudden, violent reminder that life hangs by a thread. I could feel my heart racing, pounding against my ribcage like a wild animal trying to escape. In the distance, flares burst into the darkening sky, casting long shadows over the muddy earth, each flickering light illuminating the faces of men caught between courage and despair. It was chaos, a fraying tapestry of hope and horror, a scene so visceral it felt like a fever dream. Pierre stood at the edge of the battlefield, his uniform stained and torn, the weight of his rifle heavy in his hands. The air thick with smoke and the acrid smell of gunpowder, he was a man on the brink. I remember how he clenched his jaw, a stubborn resolve battling the tremors in his hands. For France, he whispered, and I could see the ghosts of his fallen comrades in his eyes, a haunting reminder of bravery snuffed out too soon. But Pierre wasn't alone. Beside him, Marie crouched low, her dark hair clinging to her forehead, sweat mingling with dirt. The soldier's heart in her chest beat as fiercely as the artillery roaring above them. She had come into this war armed with dreams of glory, believing in the strength of the French forces, yet here she was, grappling with the raw fear that gnawed at her every thought. "What if this is it?" she whispered, her voice trembling, fragile as a spider's web. I could feel her anxiety rippling through the air, a palpable force, dragging me down into the depths of uncertainty. Strength. The French army wore it like a badge, a tapestry woven from centuries of valor and nobility. Yet, standing in that chaos, I felt the cracks. Their renowned discipline had frayed. The promise of unity was slipping through their fingers like sand. As Pierre watched his comrades fight with a courage that bordered on madness, he couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, the betrayal of a system that seemed to forget the human cost. "Do you remember the parades?" he asked, a bitter smile crossing his lips. "The flags waving, the anthems booming? They painted a picture of invincibility." I could see the shadows of memories dancing in his gaze, the ghosts of celebrations now tainted by the harshness of reality. But here we are, soldiers in the mud, fighting for a country that feels like a stranger. The juxtaposition of their past dreams and present nightmares was a knife twisting in my gut. The French army was a legacy steeped in glory, the Napoleonic Wars, the valiant sacrifice at Verdun. Yet here, in the thick of it, the weaknesses lay bare, overconfidence, underpreparedness for the brutal wave of modern warfare crashing against them. Soldiers fell like leaves in autumn, and each loss stung like a memory of home. Marie's breath hitched as the unmistakable sound of an approaching tank grew louder, a metallic beast ready to crush dreams under its steely tread. "We can't hold them back," she cried, her voice rising above the din. There was terror etched in her features, a raw vulnerability that made my heart ache. She was so much more than a soldier, she was a dreamer caught in a nightmare, and every heartbeat echoed her desperation. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was a flicker of resilience. Pierre took a breath, steadied himself, and turned to Marie. "We stand together," he said, his voice steadfast, a beacon of hope piercing through the suffocating darkness. "If we fall together." In that moment, they weren't just soldiers, they were each other's lifelines, two souls tethered by fear and courage. As the tank rolled closer, Marie pulled a grenade from her belt, her hands shaking. "What if I miss?" she whispered, the weight of her doubt suffocating. But Pierre cupped her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You won't miss," he said. "You're stronger than you know. France needs you." I felt the tension crackle in the air, a silent promise hanging between them. The world around them blurred into a haze of noise and confusion, yet in that singular moment, their connection felt like a lifeline, a thread of humanity amidst the chaos. The roar of the tank drowned out everything, but I could still hear the echo of their dreams, the weight of their burdens. The strengths of the French army, their passion, their history, were magnificently potent, yet the fragility of their resolve was a spectre looming over them. Each heartbeat felt like a countdown, a reminder of how quickly everything could collapse. And then it happened, the explosion, a thunderous roar that swallowed the night, sending shockwaves through the air. In that blinding instant, I felt time freeze. The world narrowed to a single heartbeat, a breath caught in the throat. Pierre and Marie were engulfed in chaos, two figures wrestling against the tide of destiny. I remember the faces of men around them, fear and determination warring in their eyes. I remember the glint of steel, the cries of the fallen, the shadows of hope and despair flickering like candles in a storm. The French army, a force of history, was now a battlefield of raw humanity, a chaotic dance of strengths and weaknesses, love and loss. And then it all faded, the smoke curling around them like a shroud, wrapping the battlefield in a ghostly silence. I was left with the weight of their choices, the aching uncertainty of what lay ahead. In that moment, time felt immeasurable, a vast chasm that held both promise and peril. The night stretched infinitely, the stars watching with cold indifference. I could only imagine what lay beyond that darkness, what awaited the brave souls still standing on the edge of possibility. The story didn't end, it lingered, suspended in a breath, waiting for the next act to unfold. The French forces, flawed and magnificent, were caught in a battle not just for their country, but for their very souls, an eternal dance between strength and weakness. And I was left to witness every heartbeat echoing through the void, every breath heavy with the weight of destiny. The fog hung thick as a shroud, swallowing the dawn whole. A pallid sun tried desperately to pierce through the grey, but it was all but forgotten, just like the men marching beneath its feeble light. The air was electric with tension, heavy with the scent of sweat and fear, the taste of metal lingering on parched tongues. I felt it in my bones, an anticipation, a dread, as though the earth itself held its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash of steel. "Keep moving, Arthur!" I shouted, though the words barely broke the silence, muffled by the weight of dread that filled the space between us. Arthur, my friend since childhood, was stumbling, his legs trembling as if they might give way at any moment. He was gaunt, hollow-eyed, his spirit fraying like the tattered remnants of his tunic. "You can't let them see you falter," I urged, though I felt the churning in my own stomach, the same bile of fear that threatened to consume us all. Around us, the columns of men marched onward, each face etched with the ghosts of their own fears. They were a motley crew, lords and beggars, soldiers with swords that felt heavier than their hearts. I could see it in their eyes, a flicker of doubt, a shivering realization that we were not just marching toward glory, but into a storm of death. The banners fluttered like wounded birds, and I could hear them whispering tales of treachery and forgotten honor, tales soaked in the blood of those who walked before us. Our supply lines were frayed, stretched thin like the last threads of a spider's web. We relied on the kindness of strangers, the scant mercy of the land we traversed. I often thought about the loaves of bread we'd had to barter for, how a single crust could spark a fight among men driven to desperation. I remembered the laughter that felt out of place in such grim times, the dark humor that surfaced in the face of annihilation. They bathed once a year, I had joked once, so yeah, romance was earthy. Laughter, a thin veil over our terror, yet it felt strange, almost beautiful, how we clung to it like a lifeline. But Arthur, dear Arthur, who had once chased the sun with me in our youth, was no longer jesting. He was lost in a world of shadows, haunted by the specters of what might be. "What if I don't come back?" he whispered, his voice trembling like a leaf caught in a tempest. It pierced the air, a knife that cut through the camaraderie that had once soothed our fears. What if this is where the road ends? I hated the way his words hung there, heavy and ominous, threatening to swallow the hope that flickered like a dying candle. "Don't talk like that," I replied, though I felt my own heart racing, the pulse of uncertainty drumming louder in my ears. "We have to think of the future, the glory that awaits us." But even as I spoke, visions of the battlefield loomed in my mind, and I could see the ghosts of men past, their faces a tapestry of loss and despair. The echoes of their screams haunted me, the way they faded into the earth, their dreams buried beneath the mud and blood. Our days turned into an unending procession, the horizon stretching far beyond our reach, and every step felt like a betrayal to the very ground that bore our weight. I could hear the clinking of armor, the rustle of cloaks, but more than that, I could hear the whispers of men, the tales of those who had fallen before us. The inexplicable fear, terror, was more potent than any sword, sharper than any arrow. I remember nights under the stars, a canvas of endless darkness, where the cosmos felt both terrifying and beautiful. The stars were indifferent to our plight, twinkling mockingly, as if they knew the fate that awaited us. I would lie awake, staring into that abyss, wondering if this was the last time I would feel the earth beneath my back, the last time I would breathe the air filled with the scent of pine and possibility. "Do you think they'll remember us?" Arthur had asked one night, his voice barely a whisper against the winds that howled like restless spirits. "If we die out here, will anyone care?" I wanted to tell him that history would remember us, heroes, martyrs, legends, but I could feel the weight of his despair seeping into my own heart. The truth was, I didn't know. I didn't know if we were destined for glory or oblivion. And yet, we pressed on, our hearts heavy with uncertainty. It was a march into the unknown, through lands that were both familiar and foreign, the faces of farmers and villagers shifting from kindness to suspicion. The roads twisted like the paths of our own souls, and with each mile, the burden of expectation grew. Supplies dwindled, and we became shadows of ourselves, driven by the will to survive, to fight, to prove that we were more than just men scrambling for scraps. "Look," I said one afternoon, breaking the silence that weighed on us like a leaden cloak. "We can't let despair take us. Look ahead." I pointed to the distant horizon where the sun began to break, casting golden hues over the fields. "There's still light." But even as I spoke, I felt the cold fingers of doubt creeping back in. Light might yet be a mirage, a trick of the mind, something we would chase only to find ourselves engulfed in darkness. The march to Agincourt became a crucible, refining our fears, igniting our rage. I felt it within me, a flickering flame that threatened to become a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. What awaited us was not merely a battle for land or honor, it was a battle for our very souls. The ghosts of those who had fallen whispered in the winds, urging us forward, and I clutched my sword as though it were a lifeline. "Arthur," I said quietly, as we trudged onward. "No matter what happens, we face this together." He looked at me then, and for a moment, the fear lifted, if only just a little. "Together," he echoed, and in that shared word lay the weight of our hopes and our fears, the promise of brotherhood amid the chaos that awaited us, the darkness swirling just beyond the horizon. And so we marched, through the fog and the shadows, toward the spectre of an uncertain fate, each step an echo of our defiance against the encroaching night. Rain poured down in relentless sheets, blurring the horizon into a watery abyss where fear and valor danced on the cusp of oblivion. The stench of mud and blood filled the air, an acrid storm of dread that gnawed at the gut. I stood there, knee-deep in history, clenching the hilt of my sword, my heart racing as if it were a wild stallion straining against the reins of fate. The earth beneath my feet heaved, a living thing, quaking with the weight of men and memory. Here, at Agincourt, the heavens wept for the damned and the desperate. Henry, our fierce king, stood a mere few paces away, drenched but resolute. His eyes, usually alight with the fire of glory, now burned with the shadow of doubt. I could see him grappling with the enormity of his choices, the weight of his crown pressing down like a leaden shroud. We were outnumbered, the French were a looming tide, a wall of steel and arrogance. Yet here we were, stranded in this sodden hell, where valor fought tooth and nail against the sheer absurdity of it all. I remember thinking, in that chaotic moment, what have we done to deserve this? Beside Henry stood Warwick, his face a mask of stoic defiance. He had a way of charming the dead with his words, weaving tales that lifted the spirits of the weary. But here, surrounded by the howling storm of battle, his laughter felt like a ghost, haunting and hollow. I watched him draw a deep breath, squaring his shoulders as though he could will the mud to part beneath us, as though he could defy the very terrain that sought to swallow us whole. The ground was thick and treacherous, a morass that threatened to drag us down into the abyss with every desperate lunge forward. "We must hold against the tide," he shouted, his voice cracking against the wind. But I could see the truth flicker in his eyes, holding felt like grasping at smoke, ephemeral and elusive. The French cavalry loomed, a thunderous force, ready to charge like a pack of wolves. I could almost hear the whispers of the fallen, echoing through the very soil, urging us to stand firm. "Do you remember that night by the fire, Henry?" I called out, grasping at memories like a drowning man clinging to driftwood. "You spoke of honor, of destiny. We were invincible then." His gaze flickered back to me, haunted yet determined. "Aye, and we are still invincible. We are the storm." His words rang out, and for a heartbeat, I believed him. In that moment, the mud was forgotten, the rain ceased, and we were heroes once more. But then reality crashed back in, slicing through the fragile illusion. The ground beneath us, slick and treacherous, seemed to conspire against us. Every step felt like wading through a nightmare, the earth itself a treacherous foe, sapping our strength. I remembered the tales of brave knights who had faced their enemies under bright, sunny skies, their banners unfurling with glorious pride. Here, in the muck and mire, we were less than men, we were spectres of courage, fighting against the very terrain that sought to drown us in despair. The cacophony of clashing steel and war cries rose to a fever pitch as the French charged, a wall of menacing fury. I could see their faces, twisted in determination, their armor glinting like the teeth of a monstrous beast. Panic gripped my heart like a vice, yet amidst the chaos, something flickered, an ember of hope igniting in the darkest corner of my soul. Warwick's voice surged above the din. To me. He rallied our men, a beacon against the encroaching storm. I felt the surge of unity, a tidal wave of spirit that coursed through us, even as the earth beneath our feet continued to shift like quicksand. We were not just fighting for our lives, we were fighting for the very essence of what it meant to stand, to resist the tide of history that sought to sweep us away into the shadows. But what was history, if not a series of moments that slipped through our fingers? I remember the stories of those who came before us, how they fought with valor, and how their blood seeped into the very ground we now stood upon. I could feel it now, the spirits rising, urging us onward, whispering their secrets through the downpour. You are not alone, they seemed to say. You are part of a tapestry woven through time. And then, just as I felt the surge of adrenaline, the earth erupted beneath us. The French cavalry, those merciless harbingers of doom, charged with the ferocity of a tempest unleashed. We were the dam, holding back the flood, even as our resolve trembled like a fragile leaf in a storm. I held my breath, time stretching and folding in on itself like a cruel joke. This was it, this was the moment when history would either shatter beneath our feet or rise anew from the ashes of despair. I watched as Henry raised his sword, shining like a beacon in the darkness, a promise to those around him. We fight not for ourselves, but for each other, he declared, and in that moment, his voice was a hammer driving nails into the coffins of doubt. Fight for your brothers, for your sons, for the dreams we carry like fragile lanterns against the night. And I knew, right then, that the terrain of Agincourt was not merely earth and mud. It was the cradle of our fight, a battleground of souls entwined with destiny, where every heartbeat was a drum echoing through time. With that realization, I felt something awaken within me, our primal rage, a fierce refusal to yield to the chaos. This was our moment, our stand against the storm, and I screamed alongside my comrades as we plunged into the fray. In the swirling tempest of battle, the rain became an ally, drenching us in grit and resolve. The ground became a canvas of blood and bravery, and as the clash of sword against armor rang out like a symphony of despair, I realized that we were writing our own legend, here on this unforgiving terrain. Each struggle, each heartbeat, reverberated through the ages, a haunting echo that would never fade. And as I pressed forward, I felt the weight of the earth beneath my feet change. We were no longer mere men, we were ghosts of ambition, shadows of will, battling not just for victory but for the very essence of what it meant to be alive in this moment, in this place, where history trembled on the brink of rebirth. The air crackled with tension, a heavy silence broken only by the distant thud of hooves against the earth, a reminder that death was galloping ever closer. A line of trees loomed, shadows stretching like skeletal fingers across the ground, casting a chill that seeped into the bones. I could hear the whispers of the soldiers, hearts quickening with dread, praying for the sun to vanish, anything to escape the impending storm. Then I saw him, my brother, Thomas, standing resolute, a lone figure among the chaos, his longbow cradled in a trembling hand. His eyes were wide, reflecting the fear that we all shared but dared not voice. I remember the feel of that bow, he said, his voice wavering yet fierce like the wind. It was an extension of my soul. Each word cut through the air, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of it, the promise and the burden. If the longbow was a gift, it was also a curse. It had been our salvation during countless skirmishes but loomed ominously over us now, a reminder of the lives hanging in the balance. I could see the arrows, sharp and gleaming, their fates intertwined with our own. Then there was Eleanor, fierce and unwavering, the war-torn landscape reflecting in her determined gaze. She stood beside Thomas, her presence as grounding as the earth beneath our feet. "Aim true, brother," she urged, her voice a low rumble amidst the rising din. "This battle is ours to win or lose." The words hung heavy in the air, a promise and a threat, and I felt the weight of my own inadequacies press against my chest. I was but a scribe, my quill far removed from the brutality that lay ahead. The longbow, an instrument crafted from ash and yew, was not just wood and string, it was a harbinger of fate. It possessed the power to transform men into legends, yet it could also shatter them into forgotten ashes. I watched as Thomas narked an arrow, his fingers trembling, not from fear but from the enormity of the choice he was about to make. "I remember the stories," he murmured, half to himself and half to me. "Of kings and queens crushed beneath the weight of ambition. Of warriors who fell, not to swords, but to arrows that flew silently through the air. Every pulse of his heartbeat, every breath he took, felt like a countdown. The enemy's banners fluttered in the distance, dark stains against the vibrant green of the field, a grotesque contrast that sent shivers down my spine. I could feel the air thickening, the smell of sweat and earth mingling with the metallic tang of fear. What would it be like, I wondered, to stand in that moment of choice, to release an arrow and know it carried a piece of your soul? The shrill war cry pierced the air, and with it came the realization that we were not just soldiers, but pawns in a ruthless game of fate. The longbow had its advantages, its reach, its precision, but it also demanded sacrifice. With every arrow loosed, it claimed a piece of us, a piece of who we were. I imagined the lives that would be extinguished, the families torn apart, and the weight of that knowledge was a stone in my stomach. "Remember the training," Eleanor shouted, her voice cutting through the haze of panic. I could see her face, fierce and unyielding, a reminder of what was at stake. The archer's stance, the draw, the release, it was all a dance of life and death. For every life you take, another will rise in vengeance. She felt it, too, the gnawing fear that the longbow could just as easily betray us as empower us. The enemy surged forward, shadows in the fading light, a dark tide that threatened to swallow us whole. In that moment, I saw the glimmer of hope in Thomas's eyes, ignited by the knowledge that, in this chaos, he wielded the power to protect. He drew back the bowstring, a moment suspended in time, as if the universe held its breath. I felt my own heart stop, caught in the web of uncertainty. Would he be their savior, or would he be the architect of their demise? Time ebbed and flowed like a river, and the world around us faded, leaving only the thrum of his heartbeat, the whisper of the bowstring taut with potential. Then came the release, the arrow slicing through the air, a comet of destiny. I held my breath, feeling the weight of the world in that single moment, the anxiety palpable as the arrow sped toward the unknown. But even as it flew, I felt the shadows creeping in, doubt gnawing at my insides. Each strike of the longbow bore the weight of a decision, an echo of our shared humanity. For every enemy that fell, another would rise, seeking vengeance. I grappled with the duality of it all, the exhilaration of power juxtaposed with the horror of loss. And there she stood, Eleanor, unwavering, ready with her own bow, her face a mask of determination. She was my anchor, and I was hers, caught in the storm of what it meant to wield such power. The longbow was our curse and our salvation, a symbol of the relentless cycle of violence that would continue long after the last arrow had flown. In the scorching intensity of that moment, I realized we were not just fighting for ourselves, but for those who would come after us, those who would one day tell the stories of how we lived and died. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of crimson, as if foreshadowing the blood that would soon stain the earth. The longbow, our weapon of choice, had the power to shape destinies. One moment of courage or cowardice could alter the course of history. The battlefield beckoned, and with it, the promise of both glory and despair. I felt the pull of the longbow's might, a siren's call that compelled us to step forward, to embrace the chaos. And as I took a step into that tempest, I knew that our fight was just beginning, an unending cycle of life, death, and the haunting echoes of the arrows we would send forth. The sun had not yet risen, but there was a pulse in the air, a vibration thrumming beneath the skin. Shadows stretched across the camp like dark fingers reaching out for something, a life, a memory, a future lost to the chaos of the morning to come. The smell of damp earth mingled with the sharp tang of metal, a reminder of what was to be forged that day. I stood, heart hammering, as I gripped the hilt of my sword, its weight both familiar and foreign, a promise of violence that sent a shiver down my spine. I remember the sound of my breath, ragged and loud in the stillness, as I looked over at Alaric. His brow was furrowed, the lines etched deep from nights spent wrestling with the ghosts of his decisions, the lives he had taken and left to rot on the battlefield. He was my brother in arms, yet he felt like a stranger, his eyes hollowed by the burden of leadership. I could see the flicker of doubt in his gaze, an ember of fear that threatened to consume him. What if we lose? He whispered, the words a confession, a crack in his usually stoic facade. I offered a feeble nod, too terrified to voice my own fears, the thought swirling in my mind like the encroaching fog. And then there was Ilara. She was there, her presence a flicker of warmth in the suffocating gloom. We had been friends, lovers, and now, perhaps just two souls caught in the storm of fate. She was stitching a patch onto her tunic, a mundane act made surreal in the context of impending doom. The needle danced through the fabric, an absurd contrast to the bloodshed looming on the horizon. You know, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, they say people fight harder when they have something to lose. I could see the fear in her eyes, an unspoken plea that echoed louder than the roar of impending conflict. What did she have to lose? I could barely keep my own heart from shattering at the idea. The camp was alive with a quiet that belied the chaos to come. Soldiers moved about like shadows, their faces pale with dread, eyes glazed with the knowledge of what awaited them. I recognized the tension, the strain of hope suspended between breaths. The distant sound of a horn pierced the air, echoing through the valley like the knell of a church bell, a signal that time was slipping away. Anxiety coiled in my stomach, thick and heavy, as I thought of the families waiting with bated breath, unaware of the horrors that awaited us all. I remember the way the world felt suspended in that moment, as if the very fabric of reality held its breath, painful, electric. A chill raced through me, a reminder of the fleeting nature of life. Each heartbeat was a countdown, a reminder of the seconds lost to history. Would they remember us? Would they speak our names? Or would we become mere whispers in the wind, ghosts of a time long past? I glanced back at Alaric, his eyes now locked on the horizon where the first hints of dawn began to break, a watercolor of orange and pink smeared across the sky. We must be ready, he said, the words laced with a fierce determination that ignited a fire within me. For the fallen, for our home. But what home was left? What solace could be found in a land soaked in blood and suffering? Ilara stepped closer, her gaze searching mine, as if she could pull the fear from my very soul. Promise me you'll come back, she said, the words barely more than a breath on her lips, yet they carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken hopes. We'll survive this together. But the sound of another horn interrupted her, shattering the moment like glass. The camp erupted into a frenzy, soldiers scrambling, adrenaline flooding the air thick and heavy. I could feel the heat of panic rising, swallowing reason whole. Would it be fear or courage that propelled us forward? Would bravery be enough to silence the voices whispering our fates? I turned away, forcing myself to breathe. I could hear the clang of armor, the shouts of commanders rallying their men, and amidst it all, the quiet mantra of what we were fighting for, our home, our families, our lives. I felt the sword tremble in my grasp, the cool steel like a heartbeat against my palm. It was just a weapon, a tool of destruction that could offer no comfort. Time, I muttered, as if the word itself could stretch and bend the fabric of reality, could push back the oncoming storm. But time was a cruel mistress, and it pressed closer, constricting around my chest like a vice. I could see the sun creeping up, each moment a slice of hope and despair tangled together, the horizon brightening with the promise of a new day that would not bring peace. I caught Alaric's gaze once more, and in that fleeting moment, we shared an understanding deeper than words. We were all haunted by our own demons, by memories of love, loss, and the ghosts of those who came before us. The echoes of laughter, the warmth of affection, all battered by the weight of war. Would we be the ones to rise or the ones to fall? I remember how the world felt alive and yet achingly still, teetering on the edge of catastrophe. Each heartbeat drummed like a war cry in my ears, a relentless reminder of what lay ahead. I looked at Ilara one last time, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and I felt the gravity of that moment, the emotional tether that pulled me back even as the chaos beckoned me forward. Together, I vowed, though uncertainty gnawed at my heart. We'll fight together. The sun finally broke free, casting its light over the camp, illuminating the faces of the damned and the daring alike. The tide of battle was on the horizon, and with it came a surge of adrenaline that coursed through my veins. The world was about to shift beneath our feet, and as I took a step toward the unknown, the weight of expectation pressed down, a promise, a burden, an unwritten fate. We were ready, or as ready as one could be when the spectre of death loomed so closely. And as the first cries of war echoed through the valley, I realized one unsettling truth: there was no turning back. The air crackled with tension, a silence so profound it felt almost deafening. Shadows danced along the cobblestone streets, flickering under the pallid glow of the moon. I remember the night. The chill seeped through my skin and settled in my bones, a prelude to the chaos about to unfold. I stood there, heart racing, breath shallow, a mere heartbeat away from despair. City walls towered above, ancient and stoic, yet now they felt like tombstones, each crack a whisper of the lives that had passed. Daniel stood beside me, his jaw clenched tight enough that I could see the muscles twitch beneath his skin. He had always been the daring one, the friend who thrived on thrill. But now, his eyes, those deep pools of determination, were clouded with an uncertainty I hadn't seen before. "This is it, right?" he said, voice barely above a whisper, almost swallowed by the night. "It's really happening." I remember the weight of those words, heavy and suffocating. Like a shroud draped over our heads, threatening to pull us under. I squeezed his shoulder, a silent promise of solidarity, even as my heart twisted with fear. I had always been the cautious one, the one who weighed every decision, yet here I was, teetering on the edge of an abyss. And then there was Lila. She emerged from the shadows, her presence a fragile flame in the dark. I could see the determination etched into her features, yet beneath it was a flicker of something else, fear, perhaps. It haunted her eyes like a ghost, something she couldn't quite shake. I could almost taste it, bitter and sharp. "We can still turn back," she said, her voice trembling like a brittle leaf caught in a tempest. "No," the word ripped from Daniel's lips, fierce as a crack of thunder. "There's no turning back now. We've come too far." A silence stretched, thick and heavy. I looked at Lila, her face a canvas of conflicting emotions, and I knew we were standing on the precipice of something enormous. I remember the hurried breaths, the quickening pulse. Each tick of the clock in the distance felt like a countdown, each second pulling us closer to the inevitable. Suddenly, the night was shattered by the sound of horns blaring, low and mournful, echoing like a death knell. It sliced through the air, and in that moment, every heartbeat felt magnified, reverberating in my chest. The clash was imminent, a storm brewing just beyond the horizon, ready to engulf us in its fury. "Get ready," Lila said, her voice steadying as she gripped her sword, the blade shimmering like a promise beneath the moonlight. I watched her, admiration swelling in my chest, but it was quickly eclipsed by dread. What if she faltered? What if the courage she wore like armor cracked under the weight of reality? And then it began. The clash of steel rang through the air, a symphony of chaos. I remember the first sounds of battle, the jarring clash of swords, the cries of men, both fierce and pained. Bodies collided like waves crashing against a rocky shoreline. The air, once so still, now pulsed with raw energy, a whirlwind of adrenaline and fear. I can still hear the screams. God, the screams. They reverberated through my very soul, tearing at the fabric of my being. I remember Daniel charging forward, his face a mask of fury, driven by a desire to protect, to fight for something greater than ourselves. But with every swing of his sword, with every enemy he felled, I felt a knot of dread tightening in my gut. Each moment alive with reckless abandon felt like a countdown to something terrible. Lila was a whirl of movement, her instincts sharp and deadly. I watched as she fought with a grace that seemed almost ethereal, a dance of shadows and light. But the beauty of her movements was undercut by the horror surrounding us. I remember when she stumbled, the ground slick with the blood of the fallen, her foot slipping, and for a heartbeat, I thought she wouldn't rise again. "No!" I shouted, my voice lost in the cacophony. I lunged, a desperate attempt to reach her, to shield her from the chaos. But time shifted, the world around me warped into a blur of violence. And then it happened. A flash of steel, a scream that pierced the night. My heart stopped. I remember Lila's eyes widening in shock, an expression of disbelief before the world crumbled around us. She fell, a marionette with its strings severed, crumpling to the ground like a forgotten doll. "Lila?" I screamed, collapsing beside her. The battlefield faded into a distant nightmare, her name a lifeline tethered to reality. Blood pooled beneath her, bright and crimson, stark against the cold stone. I felt the warmth of it on my hands, the weight of it sinking into my soul. Daniel was beside me, his face stricken with horror, his once certain bravado shattered. "We have to go," he urged, panic threading through his voice. "But how could I leave her? She's not gone," I insisted, clutching her trembling hand, feeling the frail warmth fading. "She can't be." But as I looked into her eyes, those bright embers of life flickering out, I knew. I remember that moment, the world collapse around us, the clash of battle a haunting echo in the distance, the shadows creeping closer, threatening to swallow us whole. In that instant, time stretched, the night deepening around us like an inescapable void. It was a heartbreak I could never articulate, a raw wound that would never heal. The cries of the fallen, the laughter of ghosts, all collided in a symphony of despair as the world spun on, oblivious. And still, the battle raged on, a tempest swirling just beyond our reach, calling us back into the storm. How could we face that chaos, knowing what we had lost? But like the shadows creeping through the streets, there was no escaping it. The clash would continue, and we were irrevocably entwined in its horrors, the aftermath just beginning. The air crackled with tension, a thick, choking fog that seeped into every corner of the abandoned warehouse. I could feel it pressing against my skin, a tangible reminder of the weight we carried, fear. It hung between us like the blade of a guillotine, poised and ready to drop. It was the kind of night where silence screamed louder than 1,000 battles, where the shadows danced and whispered secrets that gnawed at the edges of sanity. My heart raced in sync with the ticking clock that echoed through the emptiness, an incessant reminder of our dwindling time. I remember the way Elena's eyes glinted, fierce yet haunted, as she stood at the edge of the flickering light, our small group huddled together like frightened children. She was an anchor, yet her own spirit seemed frayed. "They want us to break," she said, her voice steady but wavering at the edges, like a taut string ready to snap. "They feed on our fear like vultures on a carcass." The words hung in the air, heavy and oppressive, a truth that resonated deep within my chest. And then there was Marco, a fiery soul, his anger a shield against the void that threatened to swallow us whole. I could see the way his fists clenched, the tremors of unspent rage rippling through him. "We fight back. We can't let them win." But victory felt far away, like a mirage shimmering on the horizon. The weight of despair sat heavily on his shoulders, an unseen shackle, binding him to the ground. "I remember," I whispered, not quite sure if I was speaking to him, to Elena, or to the ghosts of our fallen comrades. "I remember the night everything changed." The fear was a whisper then, barely a breath, but now, my voice trailed off, swallowed by the shadows. The night was alive, each crackle of distant gunfire a reminder that we were not alone, but the thought brought only a cold dread. I remembered the faces of those we lost, the laughter that once filled the air now replaced with silence too loud to bear. Each memory felt like a knife, twisting and turning, carving into the fragile fabric of hope. I fought to keep my gaze steady, but the memories rose like specters, haunting me, taunting me. Elena stepped closer, her presence a flicker of warmth in this desolate prison. "We have to hold on to something, anything." She paused, taking a breath that echoed with desperation. "The will to fight, it's all we have left." Her words cut through me, sharp, raw, and laden with emotion. I could see it in her eyes, the flicker of doubt battling with an unyielding resolve. She was a warrior in a field strewn with the bones of the past, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even as it trembled under the weight of fear. The room pulsed with the heartbeat of uncertainty, an unending rhythm that matched our own. We were tied together by an invisible thread, bound by our shared terror and the flickering ember of hope that refused to die. In that moment, I could feel the gravity of our situation, the suffocating pressure that threatened to crush us. Each breath was a fight, a battle against the despair that clawed at our throats, seeking to strangle the life from our resolve. "Remember the dreams." Marco's voice broke through the haze, a fire igniting in his chest. "Remember when we thought we could change the world?" His laughter, though strained, rippled through the air, a desperate attempt to pierce the darkness. We didn't sign up for this, but here we are, still standing. We can't let them take that from us. But beneath the bravado, I sensed the cracks, the way he held on to anger like a lifeline, afraid to let go, afraid of what lay beneath. I remember the city we used to know, bright and thriving, teeming with laughter and life. Now it lay in ruins, a ghost town draped in shadows, each broken window a hollow eye staring back at us. It was a haunting reminder of what we fought for, what we could lose. The thought gnawed at me, a relentless creature that feasted on my hope. Would we emerge from this, or was the fight for our very souls a losing battle? The darkness closed in, a suffocating blanket, and I felt the panic rise like bile in my throat. What if we fail? I blurted, the words bursting forth, raw and visceral. What if fear wins? The silence that followed was deafening, each second stretching into eternity. I could see the flicker of uncertainty in Elena's eyes, the glint of doubt that threatened to extinguish the flame of courage. She took a step forward, her resolve hardening into steel. Fear is a beast, but we are not its prey. The intensity of her gaze pierced through the darkness, igniting something primal within me. We are the storm, unrelenting, fierce, alive. If we let fear rule us, we lose our humanity, our very essence. Her words resonated like a battle cry, drowning out the whispers of despair. I could feel the pulse of adrenaline surging through me, mingling with every breath I took. In that moment, we were more than just a ragtag group of fighters, we were the embodiment of defiance. We were the flicker of light in an all-consuming darkness. We were the heartbeat of resistance. Let them come, I said, my voice trembling yet resolute. Let them come, and we will show them that fear is not the end, it's only the beginning. And as we stood there, united in our resolve, I felt the remnants of our shattered dreams swirl around us, transforming into something tangible, something alive. The shadows could no longer hold us captive, we had found our will to fight. But the battle was just beginning. The darkness was gathering, and with it, the ghosts of our past echoed in the silence, whispering tales of courage and terror, beckoning us forward into the abyss, into the unknown. We would rise, or we would fall, but either way, we were not going down without a fight. The night was still, but the air was electric, crackling with the promise of confrontation. We were ready to face whatever demon loomed in the shadows, prepared to confront the ultimate test of our will. Fear was a soldier, so were we. And as the clock continued its relentless ticking, the stage was set for a clash that would echo through the annals of time. The psychological warfare of fear was upon us, and the only question left was, who would emerge victorious? The air was thick with smoke, the kind that clung to the throat and tasted of ash. I stood there, heart pounding like a war drum, just a breath away from chaos. The battlefield stretched before me, a grave canvas smeared with crimson and desperation. Shouts pierced the dense fog of fear, echoing like ghosts wailing through the hollow chest of history. I could feel the pulse of the earth beneath my feet, trembling as if it, too, understood the weight of the moment. Amid the cacophony, one figure loomed larger than the rest, Commander Alaric, his face a storm of determination and dread. I could see the lines etched deep into his brow, a roadmap of past decisions, each one heavy with consequence. He clutched his sword like a lifeline, knuckles white, jaw set, willing the weight of his command to bend the tide of fate. But in his eyes, there was something else, an unmistakable flicker of doubt. Who was he trying to fool? Not the soldiers rallying behind him, nor the ghosts of those who had fallen before him. The weight of their lives hung in the air, a noose tightening around his resolve. I remember the first time I led men into battle, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. The words were swallowed by the clamor, but I caught them, shivering with unvoiced fears. That memory haunted him, I could tell. It had been a day painted bright with hope, but blood would soon wash that away. And now, his men looked to him, expecting a miracle, but he was just a man, made of flesh and fear. Then there was Lysandra, a fierce warrior with a heart blazing like the fires of the pyres they'd lit for their fallen. She stood beside Alaric, her grip steadying his shaking hand, a paradox of strength and vulnerability. Her dark hair whipped around her face, framing her fierce determination as she shouted commands, her voice a clarion call slicing through the despair. I I remember the night I told my brother I would fight, she said, barely audible over the clash of steel. He laughed and said, "You're too soft for war." I wanted to show him. I wanted to prove him wrong. Her words were heavy with longing and regret, thoughts spilling out like blood from an open wound. The memory was a ghost, lingering, twisting in her gut. But in this moment, she was the unyielding tide, pushing against the shore of despair. She turned to Alaric, her expression fierce yet soft. "We can't let them down." "Not again," she urged, and I could feel the weight of her wounded heart, aching for redemption. The love for her fallen brother was a sword in her soul, sharp and relentless. And then there was Myric, the quiet strategist, standing apart from the fray, a ghost among the living. His mind was a whirlwind of calculations, weighing the odds as if lives were mere chess pieces on a board of sacrifice. He had played his part in the shadows, but today he was called forth, pulled into the light of command. But the shadows clung to him, whispering doubts, reminding him that every decision carried a price. I remember the first life I took," he confessed, his voice trembling like the last leaves of a dying autumn. "It was a boy, barely older than a child, and I thought I was saving my comrades. But I didn't save anyone, did I? Just added to the sorrow." His eyes were distant, haunted by something that could never be undone. Each heartbeat was a reminder of that past, echoing in the hollow chambers of his chest. As battle raged, the three leaders found themselves entwined in a web of choices, each decision a thread that could unravel the fabric of their fates. They were on the precipice, a fragile balance between victory and despair. Alaric's resolve flickered, Lysandra's fierce heart beat against the dark, and Myric's mind spun with the weight of strategy and loss. In the suffocating chaos, I saw Myric approach Alaric, their shared history tugging at their hearts like a frayed rope. "We need to flank them now," he urged, his voice tinged with urgency, yet beneath it lay an unmistakable thread of fear. Fear of failure, of letting down those who had looked to them for salvation. Alaric's eyes flickered toward Lysandra. In that fleeting moment, I could see the tempest of their lives swirling, a bond forged in the fires of sacrifice. I remember how it felt to be invincible," Alaric whispered, the weight of his words crashing against the tide of his uncertainty. "But we're not gods, are we?" A fleeting smile broke through the storm of his expression, but it was a mask, a fragile thing. In that charged silence, Lysandra took a step closer, her gaze fierce yet tender. "We are not gods, but we can be strong," she declared, her voice rising above the clamor, cutting through the fog like a beacon. I felt the energy shift, as if the air itself held its breath, waiting for a spark to ignite. Then, as if the universe conspired to test their resolve, shadows shifted across the battlefield. The enemy surged forward, a dark tide that threatened to swallow them whole. Alaric, Lysandra, Myric, they stood together, a trio trembling on the edge of destiny, each carrying the weight of their choices like a shroud. But beneath the intensity, beneath the fear and the brutal reality, there was something more, a flicker of hope, a chance for redemption. I could feel it thrumming in my veins, entwining with the sorrow and the fury. They were flawed, broken even, yet they fought not just for themselves but for those whose voices had been silenced. In the throes of battle, every heartbeat became a declaration, a testament to their humanity. The cries of the fallen mingled with the clang of swords, creating a symphony of chaos, and I was right there, standing at the precipice of their struggles, feeling the pulse of their choices reverberating through time. And as the clash of steel echoed into the vast, unyielding sky, I realized, this was not just a fight for land or glory, it was a battle for their very souls, each decision a note in a haunting melody that would linger long after the last breath had been drawn. The rain fell like knives, each drop a reminder of despair, each splash a piercing echo in the muddy silence. I could taste the earth, gritty and raw, as I pressed my face into the soaked ground, the world spinning in a whirlpool of chaos and dread. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of wet soil and gunpowder, a bitter cocktail that churned my stomach. I remember clutching my rifle, its cold metal slick against my palm, as I attempted to steady my breath, but panic clawed at my throat. "Corbin! Get down!" The shout ripped through the downpour, a desperate command that sliced through the cacophony of battle. I glanced up, searching for the source, and there he was, Jack's eyes wild with fear, mud caking his cheeks like war paint. His hands trembled, a soldier transformed into a ghost, haunted not just by the enemy, but by the very ground beneath us that conspired to swallow us whole. The mud, he gasped, his voice barely rising above the storm. It'll pull us under. The truth of his words sent a shiver down my spine. The earth had morphed into a sinister trap, a quagmire that threatened to consume us with each hesitant step. I remembered the stories, whispered among the men around flickering fires, tales of soldiers lost not to bullets, but to earth and rain, overwhelmed by the weight of their own bodies, engulfed in muck, their cries muffled by the thunderous storm. But nothing prepared me for the sight of our friend, Barlow, battling against the mud, grappling for freedom as the wet earth clawed at his boots, pulling him deeper. His eyes met mine, wide and pleading, yet filled with a resignation that chilled me to the core. "Help," he shouted, his voice wavering between despair and determination. "I can't." Before I could reach him, the ground gave a violent lurch, and Barlow was swallowed whole. I felt the earth tremble beneath me, a heartbeat of its own, a vile pulse that echoed the chaos around us. I froze, the world blurring in a haze of rain and fear. Jax's hand on my arm jolted me back. "We can't, there's nothing we can do." The agony in his voice mirrored my own, the helplessness gnawing at us like the venomous bite of a snake. I could see it in his eyes, the flicker of guilt sparking against the raging storm, igniting a firestorm of anger and frustration. No one was meant to be a witness to such despair. "I won't let him die," I screamed, voice raw, the words clawing their way out of my throat. I felt the pull of the mud, the rain, the storm. It beckoned me, a siren's call, promising solace in surrender. But love for my brother-in-arms surged through me, fierce and unyielding. Bracing myself, I lunged forward, each step a battle against gravity, against the earth that fought back. Rain poured down, drenching me, blurring my vision, but I kept moving. I remember the roar of thunder, a warning, a reminder of the storm's fury as I reached the edge of the pit where Barlow had vanished. My fingers plunged into the mud, clawing. I gasped as it slid through my hands, viscous and alive, the cold shock igniting a fire inside me. "Barlow! Hold on!" I shouted, my voice mingling with the storm, desperation spilling out in waves. I wasn't sure if he could hear me, if he even had the strength left to respond. But I had to try. I dug deeper, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. "You're not gone yet, Barlow." The words were a lifeline, a tether to hope. I could feel Jax beside me, his breath heavy and labored, a silent partner in this fight against nature's wrath. The rain lashed against us, each drop a reminder of how fragile this moment was, how quickly it could all unravel. And then, a hand. I grasped it, fingers intertwining with mud and flesh, pulling. "Barlow!" I screamed, every ounce of strength pouring into that single name. The mud clung to us like old regrets, but together we fought against it, against the grip of despair that threatened to consume us. Slowly, he emerged, a figure half buried, gasping for air, eyes wide with disbelief. I yanked him up, feeling the weight of his body against me, the chill of the storm mingling with warmth, life. The mud clung to him like a second skin, but he was here, alive, breathing, heart racing. "You did it," he whispered, voice cracking, as if he couldn't believe he was still part of this world. We collapsed in a heap, Jax beside us, the three of us caught in a moment where despair twisted into something resembling triumph. The storm raged on, but for that heartbeat, the chaos was muted. The world felt vast yet small, a strange paradox where time expanded and contracted in the space of a breath. But then the ground shifted again, a reminder that nature is an unforgiving beast. The rain was relentless, and our fight was far from over. I could feel the shadows of the storm creeping closer, the darkness whispering promises of loss, of sacrifice. "Stick together," Jax murmured, the words a fragile vow against the tempest. I could see it in his eyes, the fear, the uncertainty, the flicker of hope fighting to stay alive. I remember thinking, as the rain poured and the mud churned, that we were all fighting our own battles, against the storm, against the weight of our choices, against the very earth that sought to claim us. And as the thunder echoed, deep and resonant, I knew this was only the beginning of our struggle. Each footfall was a heartbeat, each breath a prayer. Together, we navigated the treacherous path, our bond forged stronger in the depths of chaos, uncertain yet unyielding. The storm might howl and the mud might rise, but we would fight until the very end. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and sweat, a visceral reminder of what was at stake. It was the kind of silence that screamed, a taut cord stretched to its breaking point. I could feel the pulse of the room, the heartbeat of fear echoing in my ears like a war drum. There was no escape, no retreat. This was hand-to-hand combat, the rawest form of conflict where life hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of chaos. Across from me stood Marcus, his eyes two stormy seas reflecting my own turmoil. I remembered the first time we met, under the fluorescent haze of the training gym, both naive, hungry for glory. Now, he was not just a friend, he was a rival, a specter of every insecurity I held, every doubt that clawed at my heart. His fists were clenched, muscles coiling like a spring, ready to unleash a violence that was both tragic and beautiful, a dance of survival in a world that thrived on brutality. And then there was Lena, her presence a ghostly weight in the air. She stood nearby, her breath coming in shallow gasps, her eyes darting between us like a bird caught between two predators. I remembered how she laughed, how her laughter had once filled the empty spaces of our lives, turning shadows into moments of light. But that laughter now felt like a cruel echo, a reminder of what we were willing to sacrifice. In this moment, she was both my anchor and my storm, the embodiment of every choice we'd made, every path we didn't take. "Don't do this," she whispered, but fear had a way of suffocating reason. I could feel it creeping up my spine, an insidious whisper that promised safety yet demanded blood. I glanced at Marcus, anger simmering beneath the surface. We were two sides of the same coin, caught in a game played by faceless hands. I needed to fight, not just to win, but to prove something to myself. The world faded, leaving just the three of us, a triangle of tension potent enough to snap. I remembered whispers of glory, of champions who had risen from the ashes of despair. But glory was a mirage, it shimmered on the horizon, forever out of reach, taunting like a lover's ghost. In that moment, I felt the weight of every failure, every moment I had chosen fear over courage. "Remember who you are," I told myself, as if those words could conjure strength from the depths of my soul. But my hands felt heavy, trembling with the weight of unspoken fears. I could see it in Marcus's eyes, he knew. He felt the same. Then, it happened, a flash of movement, a primal instinct as we lunged at each other. The chaos unfolded in a heartbeat, a brutal ballet of fists and forearms, each blow resonating like thunder. I found myself lost in the rhythm, the visceral thud of flesh meeting flesh, the sharp staccato of breath caught in throats. It was a dance of desperation, a fight not just for victory, but for the very essence of who we were. I remember the moment I connected, a punch that landed squarely against Marcus's jaw. It felt significant, like a scream into the void. But the satisfaction was fleeting, swallowed by the gnawing realization that every victory came at a cost. His eyes narrowed, and anger ignited in their depths. He retaliated with a swift kick, pain exploding in my side. Gasping, I staggered back, the world spinning, the edges blurring. Lena's voice echoed in my mind, a haunting specter. "This isn't you." Her plea was a lifeline thrown into the turbulent sea of rage. I wanted to scream back, to tell her that this was precisely who I had become, a warrior forged in chaos, a survivor clinging to the remnants of hope. But the truth was darker, lurking beneath the surface. I was scared. Scared that if I lost this fight, I would lose myself. And then the moment shifted. Time slowed, the chaos around us fading into a distant murmur. I caught a glimpse of Marcus, sweat streaming down his face, eyes wide with the same horror I felt. This was no longer a fight, it was survival against the ghosts that haunted us. Every punch thrown was laced with our shared history, each grapple infused with an awareness of everything we had sacrificed. I remembered the late nights spent training, the camaraderie forged in shared victories and shared losses. But somewhere along the line, the fight had become personal, a twisted reflection of our fears and inadequacies. The brutality of close quarters was not just physical, it was a battle within, a fight against the shadows that whispered of failure, of abandonment. In the haze of adrenaline, my mind flickered back to Lena, standing at the edge of our chaos, a reminder of the lives we were risking. I was fighting for more than just myself, I was fighting for her too. I needed to break free from this cycle of violence. I needed to find a way back to the laughter we once shared. With a surge of determination, I focused on Marcus, my movements fluid yet fierce. The intensity crackled like static in the air, a storm brewing just beneath the surface. I felt the weight of every decision pushing me forward, driving me to confront not just him, but the darkness within me. Each punch, each grapple, was a step toward redemption, an attempt to reclaim the pieces of myself I had lost. And then, as if time had folded in on itself, I saw it, the moment of clarity, the connection between us that transcended the fight. We were not enemies, we were mirrors reflecting the battle within. I realized that the most brutal combat was not the one fought with fists, but the one waged in silence, in the shadows of our hearts. With one final clash, the world around us blurred, the chaos enveloping everything. I could feel the impending climax, the surge of emotions threatening to explode, dragging us all into the abyss. Each breath was heavy, weighted with the inevitability of what was to come, a reckoning, a collision of souls. In that instant, I understood, we were all fighting for the same thing, trapped in an endless loop of struggle and longing. And as I stared into Marcus's eyes, I knew we were destined to collide, not just in this fight, but in every choice that had led us here. The air crackled with the intensity of unspoken words, a powerful reminder that in the chaos of hand-to-hand combat, it is the heart that truly fights. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and sweat, a miasma that clung to the skin like a shroud. I can still hear the thunderous roar of hooves pounding against the earth, a wild symphony of chaos. It vibrated through the very ground, a promise that death was close. I was there, witnessing the moment chaos swallowed the last remnants of battle, where Valor met its cruel, inevitable end. Mara, a young woman with dirt-streaked cheeks and eyes that held the storm of 1,000 unspoken words, clutched her lance like a lifeline. She was a soldier, fierce and unyielding, yet shattered by the weight of expectations she could never meet. Her heart beat in a frantic rhythm, echoing the galloping horses as they charged forward, their breath a steamy cloud against the chill of impending doom. Each heartbeat whispered a question: would this be the day she finally made her mark? Would she transform from a mere whisper among warriors into a tale sung by bards? And there was Hal, her brother, who rode alongside her, his brow furrowed in concentration, his grip tighter than a noose around a condemned man's neck. He had always been the protector, the shield against the world's darkness, but today, as the enemy rose like a tide, he felt the ground shift beneath him. His courage felt like shards of glass beneath the surface, a brilliant shine with the potential to cut deep. Hal had prepared for this moment, practiced his charge 1,000 times in the quiet of the night, but now, the reality was stark. All around him, warriors were falling, their cries swallowed by the cacophony of war. The cavalry was supposed to be invincible, a symbol of strength, but as he charged, each clash of steel sang a mournful tune of futility. I remember the first time I saw a mounted charge, the thrill that coursed through me like wildfire. It was a dance of death, graceful, yet grotesque. The gallant steeds, muscles rippling under coats of sweat and blood, thundering forward in unison. What power! What glory! But here, in the stark reality, it felt like a cruel joke played by fate. Mara and Hal rode into the fray, hearts pounding in a synchrony that matched the rhythm of the rushing hooves. The enemy loomed ahead, a wall of faces twisted in rage and fear, and in that moment, time fractured. Everything slowed, the air thickening, the sounds warping into a haunting echo. Mara's mind flickered back to the stories of glory, of knights breaking lines, of legends born in the fire of battle. But legend was a distant whisper now, lost among the cries of the fallen. "Keep your head!" Hal shouted, though his own voice trembled, threatening to break under the weight of dread. "Stay close!" But the words felt hollow, mere echoes swallowed by the clamor of war. Their horses surged forward, the world a blur of colors and chaos. But just as quickly, the dream of victory crumbled. They collided with the enemy, steel meeting steel, and the air thickened with the screams of the dying. Mara felt the lance slip from her grasp, the weight of failure pressing down like a mountain. She could see Hal, desperately grappling with an enemy soldier, their faces a storm of fear and fury, two souls battling the inevitability of fate. I remember the moment the charge faltered. The cavalry, once a force of nature, became a tide that receded, retreating in fear. Horses stumbled, their eyes wide with terror, sensing the chaos that had engulfed their riders. And what of glory? What of the songs sung by the fireside? All that remained was the grim reality of bodies, tangled in the mud, dreams drowned in blood. Mara stumbled, her heart a war of its own, questioning her very purpose. She had wanted to be a hero, not a ghost haunting the battlefield. Hal had vowed to protect her, yet as he fought, she felt an overwhelming wave of guilt wash over her. She was a burden, a weight dragging him down as surely as the gravity of fate pulled them both into the abyss. Then the world exploded around them. An enemy's sword flashed, and time froze. Hal's eyes widened, disbelief merging with despair as he saw the blade coming. It was a moment stretched like a taut string, the universe holding its breath. A heartbeat passed, no, an eternity, and then the world shattered. I remember the silence that followed, the kind that screams louder than any war cry. Mara's vision narrowed, focusing on Hal, crumpling to the ground like parchment caught in fire, his life spilling out in crimson rivulets that glistened like the stars above, mocking their demise. Hal, she screamed, a raw sound that clawed at her throat, tearing through the chaos of battle. She dropped to her knees, the mud soaking through her uniform, a bitter reminder of the reality they faced. The dreams of valor and victory twisted into a grotesque mockery of what they had hoped to achieve. In that moment, anger surged through her veins, rage at the world, at fate, at the very idea of glory that had led them here. What was the point of heroism when it crumbled under the weight of tragedy? Who were they really fighting for? The echoes of her brother's laughter seemed to haunt her, whispering the tales of honor they had once cherished. A meager home. They were treasures, yes, but fragile, like glass waiting to shatter. But amidst that crushing despair, something flickered, an ember of resilience, fueled not by the promise of victory, but by the love she held for Hal. She would not let his sacrifice be in vain. I remember the fire igniting in her heart, a flame stubborn against the suffocating darkness. She picked up her lance, shaking with the weight of grief but resolute. This was not the end. No, it was only the beginning. She turned back toward the fray, the shadows of lost dreams dancing around her, breathing deeply. Each step forward felt like a defiance against the void threatening to swallow her whole. And as the cavalry faltered and fell, she was ready to charge, not for glory, not for honor, but for the love that chained her to the earth. The battle surged on, a tempest of emotions, and in that endless moment, I understood. The cavalry was not merely a charge of horses and men, it was the heart's relentless pursuit of meaning amid chaos, a reminder that love, raw, bruised, and fierce, could spark the fire needed to confront even the darkest of shadows. And so, as the tides of battle swelled and crashed, the cycle spun on, unbroken, a haunting dance that would never truly end. The night was alive with tension, a low hum that vibrated through the air like the taut string of a bow, poised and ready to unleash chaos. Somewhere in the distance, the muffled clang of metal rang out, a ghostly song of war that echoed through the valley. Shadows danced across the ground, flickering like the flames of a dying fire, as if the earth itself knew that something terrible was about to unfold. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, each beat a reminder that this was no ordinary night. "Hold steady, Rowan," came the voice, sharp like the crack of a whip. It cut through my thoughts, pulling me back into the fray. I turned to see Ilara, her eyes fierce and determined, a stark contrast to the trembling of her hands as she gripped her bow. She was a storm contained within a fragile vessel, a warrior forged by loss. I remembered the stories, how she'd trained for this moment, how she'd watched her brother fall in battle, an arrow lodged in his throat, his eyes wide with the shock of betrayal. I could see that same hurt simmering just beneath the surface, threatening to bubble over as the enemy drew closer. The ground felt alive beneath my feet, and I could almost hear it whispering tales of the past, of battles fought and lives lost. I remembered when I first picked up a bow, the thrill of the string against my fingertips, the promise of power in that simple wooden shaft. But now, the weight of the bow felt like a noose, tightening around my throat with every breath. I had a family, a life waiting for me beyond the blood and chaos. Yet here I stood, torn between loyalty and the instinct to survive. Focus! Ilara barked, snapping me from my spiraling thoughts. They'll come for us. They always do. I nodded, though I felt far from ready. The air was charged with dread, a palpable force that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Each breath felt like a countdown, a clock ticking down to the inevitable moment when the darkness would descend. I glanced at the other archers flanking us, their faces pale but resolute, each of us wrapped in our own mental shields, guarding against the horror that lay ahead. Remember your training, Ilara continued, her voice softer now, yet still edged with urgency. We are the eyes in the dark. We are the first line of defense. I swallowed hard, thinking of the way they had taught us to aim, to breathe, to release. The rhythm of the release felt like a heartbeat, steady, unwavering. But here, in the heart of battle, that rhythm faltered. My heart raced as the enemy emerged from the trees, a tide of dark figures surging toward us like a wave of death. The moon hung low, a silent witness to the impending destruction. Now! Ilara's voice cut through the night, and we drew our bows, the strings vibrating against our fingers. In that moment, time stretched, warped, a web of fleeting seconds. I could see their eyes glinting, hungry for blood, shadows in the night. I breathed deeply, letting the air fill my lungs, feeling the cold bite against my skin, tasting the inevitability of what was to come. Fire! The command erupted from our lips like a battle cry, and with a single motion, we released our arrows into the abyss. They sailed through the night, glinting silver under the moonlight, and for a heartbeat, I felt untouchable. But the moment shattered. The sound of flesh meeting steel was a visceral reminder of mortality. Screams cut through the night, raw and anguished, a symphony of despair that resonated deep within me. I searched for Ilara's face but found only the reflection of terror in her eyes as we watched our arrows find their marks. I felt a duality of horror and exhilaration rip through me. I was alive, but at what cost? More, she cried, a desperate command that felt like a plea. We notched our arrows, the rhythm now a frantic dance, a desperate attempt to stem the tide. I watched as one of our own fell, an archer named Caden, his body crumpling like parchment in the wind. I remembered his laughter, the way he'd joked about the stench of our unwashed bodies after a long day of training. Caden! I shouted, the word escaping my lips in a breathless gasp. My heart shattered, splintered into 1,000 jagged pieces. There was no time for mourning. The enemy surged forward, a wave of bodies crashing like thunder against our fragile line. I could see Ilara, fierce and unyielding, but even she was starting to falter, her arrows running low. To the left, she yelled, and I followed her lead, but my hands trembled, betraying me. Rowan, she called, her voice rising above the chaos. We have to fall back. Fall back. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. There was no backing down when death was at the door. I felt the weight of fate pressing down on me, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I glanced toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to rise, a sliver of hope creeping into the darkness. But it felt so far away, like a distant memory I could barely grasp. Then I saw him, one of the enemy, a hulking figure with eyes dark as night, charging toward us with a blade raised high. Time slowed again, a cruel trick of the mind. I could hear the pounding of my heart, and fear snaked its way through my veins. The bowstring felt slick beneath my fingers, but I drew back, aiming high, searching for that flicker of courage my training had promised. I released. The arrow flew, a whisper against the night, and for a moment, I dared to believe. It struck true, embedding itself deep within the enemy's chest. He fell, but I was left hollow, the ache of victory mingling with the loss of all that had been. Rowan! Ilara's voice broke through my haze of despair. Now! We need to move! I turned to her, and in her eyes, I saw the reflection of 1,000 ghosts, lost dreams, fallen friends, the weight of every moment that had led us here. With a final glance back at Caden's still form, I turned to run, feeling the shadows claw at my back. Each step took me further from the past, but the memories haunted me like a whisper in the wind, a reminder that the night was far from over. The silence hung thick, palpable, a heavy fog of disbelief clinging to the air, choking the cries of the wounded. Smoke twisted like ghosts around the remnants of shattered dreams, broken bodies sprawled across the land they once fought for, each one a story, a heartbeat that echoed long after the gunfire had ceased. I remember the scent of iron mingling with the stench of fear, a pungent reminder that life is fragile, that hope can slip through our fingers like sand. In the distance, a faint moan cut through the stillness, a sound so raw, so desperate, it sent shivers racing down my spine. It was James, my brother in arms, my friend. I knelt beside him, my hands trembling, sweat mixing with the dirt on my brow. I could barely breathe as I cradled his head in my lap, feeling the warmth of his blood seep through my fingers. "Stay with me, James," I whispered, though deep down, I knew those words were more for me than for him. His eyes fluttered, struggling to focus on my face, the laughter we once shared now a distant memory. I can't feel my legs." His voice, barely a whisper, was laced with disbelief, a plea for the impossible. I choked back tears, forcing a smile that felt like glass lodged in my throat. I remembered our plans, the dreams we painted in the twilight, of lives unshackled from the chains of war. And now, here we were, a battlefield claiming what it could, my heart splintering as I realized it might take him too. A sudden boom shattered the silence, an explosion that rattled the ground beneath us, sending a wave of dust and debris into the air. I flinched, the instinct to shield him from the danger igniting a fire within me. But panic surged as I glanced around, taking in the chaos. Bodies, like discarded marionettes, lay tangled in the remnants of a fight that had stripped them of their humanity. I saw Helen, her once bright eyes dulled by the weight of loss, cradling her husband's lifeless form. She was a spectre among shadows, her cries a haunting melody that pierced through the fog, a reminder that love, in war, can be as cruel as the weapons we wield. Then there was Mark, shoulders bowed beneath the weight of guilt, a soldier who had fought valiantly but found himself unable to save his squad. I saw him staring blankly at the ground, a man haunted by ghosts of comrades who had fallen beside him. Each name echoed in his mind, a litany of despair. "I should have been there," he repeated, as if the words could conjure them back, as if his sorrow could rewrite their fates. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but I felt my own heart cracking under the enormity of our shared pain. I remember the stars that night, distant and indifferent, twinkling in the abyss above as if mocking our plight. They felt so far away, so unreachable, and I wondered if they too felt the burden of witnessing our suffering. I sat back, my hand resting on James' shoulder, trembling, knowing the battle was not just with bullets and blood but with the very essence of who we were. We were alive, yet death danced around us, his shadow looming ever larger. "James, listen to me," I urged, my voice faltering, "you have to fight. You have to," but the words faded as he closed his eyes, a single tear escaping, tracing a path down the dirt-streaked face of a man who had once laughed at the absurdity of life. His breathing grew shallow, and with each gasp, I felt a piece of my soul slip away, the darkness creeping in, ready to claim him. And then came the laughter, it rang out, unexpected and chilling. A soldier, delirious from pain or perhaps madness, stood amidst the wreckage, grinning as if in a macabre play. "Look at us! We're heroes," he cried, his voice a jagged knife, cutting through the fog of grief. The absurdity of it was staggering. Heroes? We were nothing but pawns, caught in a game played by men far removed from the dirt and blood, their suits and ties untouched by the horror. I could feel my anger rising, bubbling like molten lava. "We're not heroes," I shouted, my voice broken. "We're ghosts, wandering in a graveyard of dreams." But the laughter continued, and it morphed into something else, an echo of despair as the soldier sank to the ground, laughter fading into sobs that tore at the very fabric of our reality. I turned back to James, his face pale, the light fading from his once bright eyes. The world around us was a tapestry of grief and horror, woven tightly with threads of sorrow, each casualty a testament to our failure to grasp the fragility of life. I remember the ticking of the clock, the seconds dragging on like a lifetime, each tick a reminder of time slipping away. I wanted to scream, to rage against the universe for its cruelty, for the way it toyed with our hearts. I felt the weight of the cosmos pressing down on me, an infinite void swallowing every shred of hope. The earth beneath me felt alive, shuddering with grief, each breath an echo of the lives lost that day. And just as I thought I could bear it no longer, a whisper broke through the chaos, a promise of resilience. "I'll see you again," James murmured, his voice a fragile thread connecting us, a lifeline in the storm. I held on to it, desperately, for in that moment, I realized that we were more than just soldiers, more than a collection of scars and memories. We were the sum of our experiences, the love we fostered, the dreams we dared to dream, even amidst the ruins. But the darkness was relentless, an ever-encroaching tide that threatened to drown us all. Each heartbeat echoed, a reminder of the tenuous grip we held on life. As the horizon began to bleed into the colors of dawn, I felt the shadows stretch, a harbinger of what was to come. The aftermath of our battle was not just the scars on our bodies but the wounds etched deep within our souls, an indelible mark of the price we paid for the fleeting moments of glory. And as I knelt there, with the dying light cradled in my hands, I realized we were all casualties of this war, not just in body but in spirit, forever changed, forever haunted. I could almost hear the whispers of the fallen, their stories intertwining with our own, a haunting melody that would never fade. Even now, as the world began to awaken, the echoes of war lingered like shadows, waiting for the next battle, the next sacrifice in the name of something we could barely grasp. The moon hung low, a pallid eye above the battlefield, where shadows danced in the sickly glow of dying fires. The air was thick with the stench of sweat and rot, a pungent reminder that disease lingered far closer than any enemy. Inside the makeshift hospital, chaos reigned, cries mixed with the echoes of despair and the relentless ticking of a clock, each second counting down the moments of life left for the men who had once marched proud. I remember Thomas, his face a canvas of dirt and blood, eyes flickering like dying flames. He had always been the joker, quick with a quip about the mud caking his boots, or the absurdity of how they hadn't bathed in weeks, a year's worth of romance, trapped in a single stench. He'd laugh, but laughter now lay shattered among the groans of the ill. The fever had gripped him, stealing his humor and spirit, leaving only a hollow shell, adrift in a sea of anguish. "Tommy," I whispered, half-heartedly gripping his hand, feeling the heat radiate like a furnace. He turned to me, and in that moment, a flicker of recognition crossed his glazed eyes. "I remember," he rasped, voice barely a whisper, "the fields back home. The sun setting like a fireball. Not like this." His words trailed off, swallowed by the void that disease carved into his being. I watched as the nurse, a weary angel with tired eyes, rushed to his side. She was a spectre of compassion, moving through the chaos with a purpose that defied the despair surrounding us. I wanted to scream, couldn't she see that mere bandages wouldn't save him? Disease didn't play fair, it was a silent executioner, creeping into the cracks of the soul, stealing not just life, but the very essence of who they were. Then there was Marcus, just 20, his youth stripped away by the relentless grip of illness. I remember the day he arrived, full of bravado, laughing at the horrors we faced, as if he could charm death itself. "Look at me, I'm invincible," he declared, smirking through the grime. But now, he lay prostrate, the delirium twisting his mind into nightmarish shapes. "Ghosts," he mumbled, eyes darting as if he could see the specters that haunted him. "They're everywhere. They want me." "Marcus," I called, but my voice was lost among the cacophony, drowned out by the mournful wails of others in torment. "It's just the fever. You're safe here." But I knew it was a lie, a fragile shield against the truth that hung like a noose above us. Disease was a ghost, lurking in the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim. The sickened bodies crowded the space, a grotesque tableau of suffering. Each face told a story, some etched in pain, others in resignation. I remember the moments of stillness that stretched like eternity, broken only by the sound of a distant cannon, a reminder that the war outside raged on, even as we fought our own battle against the insidious sickness that crept in with every breath we took. I could hear the whispers of the dying, their words a chaotic symphony of regrets and fears. I never, if only, forgive me, the air was electric with the weight of unfulfilled dreams, like a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. The clock ticked on, a cruel reminder that time was not a friend to the damned. In the middle of this tempest, I found myself drawn to the small window, where an unholy light crept through, illuminating the dust motes that floated like lost souls. What are we fighting for? I thought, the question an echo in the cavern of my mind. The soldiers outside were battling for glory, for honor, for king and country, but inside, we fought for something far more visceral, the right to live, to breathe without the fetters of disease chaining us to our fates. I remember the night the fever took Thomas. The world outside fell silent, as if bowing to the grim reality that unraveled in that dimly lit room. His body convulsed, each spasm a desperate plea for life. I held his hand, feeling it grow colder, the warmth receding like the tide. I remember, he gasped, eyes rolling back, the laughter, the fields, and just like that, he was gone. The laughter of the past faded into an echo, leaving only the haunting silence of the void he had vacated. Marcus followed soon after, his eyes wide with terror, chasing shadows that danced beyond comprehension. "They're here! I see them," he screamed, the fever twisting his words into frantic cries. I wanted to scream too, to rage against the injustice, the cruelty of disease that stripped away their very essence, turning vibrant lives into mere memories. But the weight of despair gripped my throat, rendering me voiceless. The candle sputtered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and I could almost hear the whispers of the ghosts, recounting their stories, those who had succumbed not just to bullets and blades, but to a more insidious foe, invisible yet deadly, the diseases that plagued the land, battering the bodies of the bravest men. Bathing in a river of filth, they had painted their own demise, and I stood helpless, a witness to the carnage that unfolded in the hearts of the living and the dying. And so, the night wore on, each tick of the clock a reminder of the frailty of life, the relentless march of time making fools of us all. As I sat among the ghosts of my friends, I felt the weight of their stories settling upon me like a shroud. To remember was to carry their grief, a burden that thrummed in my chest, a symphony of sorrow. "Will you remember us?" I whispered into the darkness, hoping somehow my voice would reach them in the ether, hoping they would not fade into nothingness, but instead become part of the very fabric of time. I didn't want to let them go. A promise made in the depths of despair, to hold their memories close, even as the world beyond continued to spin, oblivious to the tales woven into the marrow of the earth. And as dawn crept cautiously over the horizon, painting the world in hues of gold and crimson, I felt the ghosts linger, their stories entwined with mine, a tapestry of heartache and resilience, stitched together in the face of an insurmountable foe. The battle raged on, not just outside but within, and I stood ready to confront the darkness, holding tightly to the memories of those who fought and fell, their spirits forever entwined with my own. The air is thick with the scent of smoke, a bitter haze that claws at the throat. I stand in the remnants of what was once a home, a sanctuary now reduced to splintered wooden memories. It's eerily silent, save for the creaking of the walls, whispering secrets of lives that once thrived here. Beneath the ash, I can almost hear their laughter, a haunting echo mingling with the distant wails of sirens that paint the night with urgency. In this moment, the world has narrowed down to our three trembling hearts, each beating in time with the rhythm of trauma. I remember the night vividly. I remember being on the floor, clutching my sister's hand, the warmth fading like the last rays of sunlight. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the chaos outside, a storm of fear and confusion brewing in her innocent mind. "Will we be okay?" she whispered, and in that moment, I crumbled. A promise lodged deep in my throat, suffocating me. I remember how I didn't know what to say. How could I assure her when my own heart was gripped by an icy fist? Then there was Sam, our neighbor, a young man whose laughter once danced through the hallways like music. Now, he stood beside us, a silhouette carved against the flickering glow of flames. His body trembled, not from the cold, but from the relentless grip of anxiety, a beast that clawed at his insides. "We need to get out, now," he shouted, panic weaving through his voice, yet there was something else, something deeper. I watched as he cast a glance back at the inferno, his eyes haunted. This was no longer just a fire, it was a manifestation of his deepest fears, of dreams turned to ashes. I knew it was more than the blaze, it was the weight of expectations, of survival, of being the protector he never felt he was. The memories of past failures swirled around him, shadows that refused to be exorcised, mocking him as the flames licked higher. We stumbled through the door, the world outside stark in its contrast. The night sky was a deep velvet, stars pinpricking the darkness, a cruel reminder of the vastness of the universe, of how small we felt in that moment. I can still feel the heat on my skin, a reminder of what had been lost, of the fragility of safety. The night swallowed our screams, the city around us indifferent, a ghost town echoing with our turmoil. Days turned into weeks, and the psychological scars embedded themselves deeper than the physical ones. I watched as Sam drifted further into himself, a shell of the man who had once stood so tall. He would sit in darkness, the weight of the silence pressing down on him, his mind racing with relentless thoughts. I remember the way he'd clutch his head, as if trying to squeeze out the ghosts that haunted him, images of flames, the screams of people he couldn't save. "I can't breathe," he would say, his voice a fragile whisper. It was a plea, a cry for help buried beneath layers of shame. I wanted to reach out, to pull him back from the edge, but what could I say? I was drowning in my own memories, my own nightmares. Nights blurred into one another, filled with shadows that danced in the corners of my mind. I remember waking up, drenched in sweat, the echoes of my sister's question ringing in my ears. "Will we be okay?" Every dawn felt like a cruel joke, waking up to a world that had moved on while I remained anchored in the past. And then there was my sister, Amelia, who began to unravel in ways I could never have predicted. I would find her staring out of the window, her gaze lost somewhere in the distance. "What if it happens again?" she would whisper to herself, a mantra repeating like an incantation, each word wrapping around her like chains. I remember the day she stopped playing. She used to dance to the music of the city, her laughter twinkling like the stars above. Now, she was a ghost, flickering in and out of existence, her dreams buried beneath the rubble of that night. I tried to hold on to her, to pull her back from the precipice of despair. "Amelia, let's go outside," I would say, but she would shake her head, her eyes glossed over. Each rejection cut deeper, carving wounds into my heart that throbbed with desperation. I could feel the walls closing in around us, the shadows creeping closer, whispering lies of hopelessness. Time became a cruel joke. The clock on the wall ticked with an agonizing slowness, each second dragging like a weight on our souls. I tried to carry the burden of our pain, but it was a heavy load, one that crushed my spirit beneath its weight. I remember the conversations that felt like hollow shells, words bouncing off the walls but never reaching each other. We were trapped in our own minds, battling demons that roared with ferocity, each echoing scream a reminder of what we had lost. One night, as the storm raged outside, I found myself standing in front of the mirror. I looked deep into my own eyes, searching for the person I used to be, the one who laughed, who dreamed. Instead, I saw a stranger staring back, eyes clouded with shadows. "You're still here," I whispered, a flicker of defiance sparking in the darkness. But the words felt empty, like a promise made to a ghost. And just like that, the nights turned into months. The city carried on, but we were ensnared in a web of despair, our hearts tethered to the past with threads of unhealed wounds. Each day felt like a battle, a struggle to keep afloat in an ocean of pain and loss. The psychological scars were invisible but etched into our souls, a tapestry of horror woven with threads of memories we couldn't escape. Yet in the depths of that darkness, a flicker of hope emerged, a relentless spark that whispered to us in the silence. Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to the light. As the world around us spun in chaotic disarray, we took the first shaky steps, each breath a fragile promise. We were survivors, bound by the scars of our past but determined to rewrite our story, one heartbeat at a time. And just when I thought we could reclaim our lives, a knock on the door shattered the fragile peace we had begun to build. The shadows stirred once more, and I felt the ground beneath us tremble, a reminder that the past is never truly gone. It lingers, waiting, watching. The rain fell like the wails of the damned, a torrential downpour that soaked the ground, turning it to mud, erasing the whispers of history and replacing them with the cacophony of war. It was the morning of October 25, 1415, and the air crackled with a tension so thick you could taste it, a concoction of fear, hope, and the metallic tang of impending violence. I remember standing there, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm, the whispers of the past echoing in my ears. "Henry, our king, held his sword high, a beacon for all who stood before him, but inside, he was a tempest. He was a man torn between duty and despair, a ruler burdened by the weight of his crown. I could see it etched into the lines of his face, the way he clenched his jaw, as if to keep the ghosts of his ancestors at bay. The French were coming, a tide of crimson banners and glinting armor, a monstrous wave that threatened to swallow us whole. Beside me stood Edward, my brother in arms, his eyes wide and wild, like a deer caught in the hunter's sights. He was a farmer-turned-soldier, still grasping the life he had left behind, a life of sunlit fields and the sweet scent of earth after rain. But today, that life felt like a distant memory, a dream fading with the light. He had a fierceness in him, a flame that burned bright, but I could see the flicker of doubt creeping in, threatening to snuff it out. "I remember the fields," he whispered, his voice barely rising above the thunder of hooves. "I remember the way the sun kissed the wheat, how it swayed like a sea of gold." His words hung in the air, heavy and poignant. I wanted to reach out, to grasp his shoulder and pull him back from the brink of despair, but I was frozen, my own memory swirling in a tempest of emotions. I remembered my mother's voice, soft and soothing, a lullaby against the backdrop of a world gone mad. "You will be brave, my son," she had said, but bravery felt like a cruel joke now, a fragile mask over a heart quaking in fear. The ground shook as the French cavalry advanced, a dark tide of armored giants riding death. I could almost hear the whispers of the fallen beneath our feet, their stories begging to be told, their battles echoing through time. The field was a graveyard of hopes and dreams, and as I stood there, I felt the weight of history pressing down on my chest. "Are we to die here?" Edward's voice cracked, desperation seeping into every syllable. I glanced at him, his face pale as the clouds above. "Not today," I replied, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "Today, we make history." And in that moment, the air shifted, charged with an energy that could ignite the very heavens. Henry rallied us with words that dripped with conviction, a sermon of valor that ignited something within. "We are outnumbered, yes. But they have no heart, no soul. We are the sons of England, and we will not be broken." His voice rose, a clarion call that tore through the fog of doubt, and I felt it, like a fire igniting my very soul. The French, with all their numbers and arrogance, could not extinguish the flame that flickered in our hearts. The battle cry surged, a primal scream that seemed to rattle the bones of the earth itself. Then it began, the clash of steel, the shrieks of rage and agony. I was swept into the chaos, a whirlwind of violence and desperation. Each swing of my sword felt like a prayer, each strike a desperate plea to the cosmos to spare us. I fought beside Edward, our movements instinctual, our bond forged in the fires of fear and courage. Amidst the chaos, time felt elastic. Each second stretched into an eternity, every death a hollow echo in the tapestry of our lives. I remember the mud beneath my feet, thick and viscous, pulling at my boots like the hands of the dead, urging me to join them. But I pressed on, fueled by the ghosts of our ancestors, the weight of their legacy driving me forward. And then, in the heart of the storm, I saw it, the moment where everything would change. Henry, sword aloft, a beacon of defiance, faced the French commander, a giant clad in steel. Their eyes locked in a battle of wills, two worlds colliding in a single heartbeat. I could feel the air crackle with the weight of destiny, the universe holding its breath. "Your arrogance blinds you," Henry shouted, his voice a bell tolling in the silence. "You may have numbers, but we have courage." With a roar, they clashed, and I was lost in the fray, the world around me fading as I fought against the tide of despair. I remember the taste of blood mingling with the rain, the screams of men twisted into an orchestra of pain. In that maelstrom, I glanced at Edward, his face painted with fear and fury. I saw him fighting, a whirlwind of determination, but then I saw the moment, the instant when a blade found its mark. A gasp escaped my lips as he staggered back, blood spilling like the rain, soaking the earth that had once cradled our dreams. "Edward!" I screamed, as if my voice could pull him back from the brink, but the shadows of fate had other plans. As he fell, it felt as if the very sky cracked open, mourning the loss of a brave soul. With rage coursing through my veins, I fought harder, every swing of my sword a tribute to his sacrifice. I could feel the tides of battle shifting, the French faltering under our relentless spirit. With Henry leading us, our cries rose higher, echoing through the ages. And then it happened, the tide turned. The French, once a wall of iron, broke like waves against the shore. They fled, retreating into the shadows, and in that moment, victory tasted bittersweet. As I knelt beside Edward, cradling his head in my arms, I felt the weight of history settle upon my shoulders, a burden of loss and glory intertwined. His breath was shallow, eyes clouded with the mist of fading life. I remembered the fields, the laughter of a boy turned soldier, and the dreams that would never see the light. "Brother," he whispered, a flicker of recognition passing between us. We made history. I felt the world shift around me, the echoes of our battle reverberating through time. Agincourt was more than a moment, it was a legacy, a testament to the human spirit, a tumultuous dance of death and glory that would forever shape the battlefield. And as I held him, the rain continued to fall, mingling with the blood and earth, a reminder that our stories do not end, they ripple through time, haunting the edges of memory and crafting the future of warfare, a legacy forever etched in the hearts of those who dare to dream. Rain drummed on the earth, each drop a herald of what was to come, and I stood there, soaked to the bone, my heart racing as if it might leap from my chest, merge with the storm. The air crackled with the tension of 100 souls, clutching their swords, their hopes, their fears, a collective pulse that throbbed against the canvas of chaos. This was Agincourt. This was not just a battlefield, it was a crucible of human will, where despair and valor danced in a brutal embrace. I saw him first, Henry. King, warrior, a man who wore uncertainty like a cloak, his brow furrowed, lips pressed tight. Each breath he took seemed to draw in the very essence of the earth, the mud beneath his feet alive with the weight of history. The ghosts of countless fallen whispered around him, their presence palpable, urging him forward. Oh, how desperately he wanted to believe in destiny, how he clung to it, like a child grasping a nightmare. And then there was William, a common archer, a man with a face etched in lines of hardship and heartache. He gripped his bow with calloused hands, the wood smooth against his palm, a stark contrast to the jagged dreams that haunted him. I remember his eyes, haunted, searching for purpose. He flicked a glance at Henry, a fleeting moment of kinship forged in the fires of desperation. "We fight for our king," William muttered, but his voice cracked, revealing the doubt that gnawed at him like an insatiable rat. What did they know of royalty, of chivalry? They were but men, standing on the precipice of annihilation, yet it was the weight of their own haunted legacies that bore down on them, heavier than the steel they bore. I remember the taste of fear, metallic and sour, thick in the air. And yet, beneath that fear, there was something else, a flicker of defiance, a shared understanding that life, in all its absurdity, was meant to be lived. The enemy approached, their dark silhouette slicing through the fog like knives through flesh. I could feel the shifting sands of fate, each footfall of the French army echoing like a death toll. This was chaos, a symphony of clanging steel, cries of valor, and the sickening thud of bodies hitting the ground. I could almost hear the echoes of the future clashing with the present, the lessons yet to be learned. "Hold!" Henry bellowed, voice cutting through the din like a beacon. "We are the underdogs. We stand against the tide." But with every word, I saw the tremor in his hands, the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. This wasn't just a fight for territory, it was a battle for the very soul of what it meant to be human, the right to stand tall against the void. And in that moment, William took a breath so deep it felt as if he were inhaling the very essence of the world around him. "We are more than just men," he shouted, the words bursting from his chest like a flame igniting dry kindling. "We are legends waiting to be born." The fire in his voice stoked the embers of courage in the hearts of those around him, igniting a storm of determination. I remember the arrows soaring overhead, whistling through the air like vengeful spirits, each one carrying the weight of 100 hopes. I could taste the adrenaline, the sweat mingling with the rain, the haunting realization that this was not just a battle of swords and shields, but of strategy and heart. The longbow, that miraculous weapon, became an extension of William's very soul, each shot a testament to his spirit, a challenge to the fate that sought to consume them. But what of the lessons that lingered in the air, unspoken yet palpable? The ancient wisdom that echoed through time, whispering of resilience, adaptability, and the importance of the individual amidst the chaos of the collective? Each clash of steel, each arrow released, taught us that victory is not merely a product of strength, but of cunning, of understanding the terrain of both the battlefield and the human heart. As the battle raged on, I felt the weight of history pressing down on us, an invisible force that bound us to those who had come before, those who had faced impossible odds and emerged, scarred yet resolute. The essence of Agincourt was not merely in the blood spilled upon the ground, but in the indomitable spirit that emerged from the ashes of despair. The tide of battle ebbed and flowed, a cruel dance, and I watched as Henry rallied his men, his voice a clarion call cutting through the fog of despair. We fight not just for ourselves, but for generations yet unborn. For the right to exist, to breathe, to dream. And it was here that the heart of the lesson unfolded, as modern tactics would glean from this nightmare-turned-legend. It wasn't about overwhelming force, it was about seizing advantage where it lay, understanding the terrain, both physical and emotional. It was about recognizing that fear can be a weapon, but so can hope. The world around me blurred, a whirlwind of chaos and courage, and in that dizzying moment, I felt the collision of past, present, and future. This was the essence of humanity, the struggle, the laughter, the heartbreak, it was all intertwined. Henry, William, and I, we were ghosts in this moment, echoes of a time that would ripple through the ages. I remember the laughter that erupted amidst the horrors, the absurdity of men in armor, struggling against an unseen foe, an echo of our own humanity, flawed and beautiful. The lessons learned at Agincourt were not confined to the battlefield, they rippled out into the vastness of existence. Each heartbeat, each breath, captured the essence of what it meant to stand firm in the face of calamity, to embrace chaos, and to find solace in the bonds forged through fire. I remember the shadows that danced across the field, long and twisted, the ghosts of those who had fought and those who would fight again. Here, in this place of anguish and glory, the eternal struggle of mankind continued, an endless loop, the reminder that in the face of despair, we rise, again and again, carving our place in the cosmos, one heartbeat at a time. The night was alive with the stench of gunpowder, the air thick and heavy, a visceral reminder that life could slip away in the blink of an eye. I stood in the trenches, heart hammering like a war drum, the ground vibrating beneath my feet. The world around me was chaos, bullets whizzed overhead, the cries of the fallen mingling with the cries of the terrified. Silence was a luxury we could not afford. Each second stretched, a taut wire ready to snap, and I could feel the tension coiling tighter, like a serpent ready to strike. I remember the faces, so many faces. Strangers and friends blurred together in a kaleidoscope of fear, each of us wearing our own brand of desperation. There was Jones, his hand shaking as he clutched his rifle, eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. He was just a kid, maybe 20, with dreams of home that felt distant as the stars. "I just want to go back," he muttered, voice shaky, and in that moment, I could see the child in him, the one who had never known anything but safety before this hell. And then there was Garcia, his spirit unbreakable, even as the darkness threatened to engulf him whole. "Stick with me," he shouted, a rallying cry against the encroaching dread. But underneath that bravado, I saw the cracks, the fear seeping through the surface like blood from a wound. He wore that fear like a badge, and it terrified me. How could he hold it together when I could barely stand? The night pulsed with the thrum of anguish, a heartbeat that belonged to the earth itself. We were surrounded by shadows, the ghosts of the fallen, the echoes of what could have been. Every breath was a gamble, an act of rebellion against fate, each heartbeat a reminder that we were alive, if only for a moment longer. The acrid taste of fear mingled with the metallic tang of blood, and I felt a wave of nausea crashing over me. This was survival, not living. I remember the small moments, the flickering light of a dying lantern casting eerie shadows on the faces of my comrades, the soft crackle of radio static as we waited for orders that would never come. Time distorted, stretched beyond recognition, and I found myself lost in a memory of a simpler day. Laughter over a game of cards, the warmth of the sun on my skin, the smell of fresh coffee wafting through the air. How could those moments exist alongside this nightmare? "Hey, you okay?" Jones's voice broke through the fog, a fragile lifeline in a sea of despair. I managed a nod, though I felt like a ghost myself, adrift and untethered. I wanted to tell him that I wasn't okay, that the weight of it all pressed down on me like a boulder ready to crush my very spirit. But I didn't. Instead, I swallowed hard and forced a smile that felt like a mask. Then came the explosion, a deafening roar that shattered the night, sending tremors through the ground, through us. The world imploded in an instant, and I was swallowed by dust and darkness. I could feel the air rush from my lungs, a sickening realization dawning that some of us wouldn't rise again. The earth trembled beneath me, and I could hear the frantic cries of my comrades, the fear palpable, thick as the smoke that wrapped around us like a shroud. Garcia's voice cut through the chaos, desperate and unyielding. "Get up. We need to move." But could I move? The weight of despair anchored me to the ground, a stone pressing down, refusing to let me go. I felt the pull of grief, a tide threatening to drown me, and I fought against it. I had to fight. For Jones. For Garcia. I remember the moment I found my feet again. It was a struggle, a fight against the overwhelming urge to succumb to the darkness. I stumbled toward the sound of Garcia's determined shouts, weaving through the remnants of our shattered reality. The stench of smoke and blood was suffocating, each breath a reminder of the stakes. I had to survive. We had to survive. The eerie silence that followed the explosion was deafening, a gaping void that swallowed the sounds of the living. I turned, scanning the faces, searching for signs of life. One by one, they emerged from the haze, some battered, some broken, but alive. Jones was there, wide-eyed and trembling, his spirit flickering like a dying flame, and Garcia stood tall, unwavering amidst the ruins. "Stay close," he barked, urgency threading through his voice. But I could see the doubt creeping in, the flicker of uncertainty that gnawed at the edges of his confidence. How long could we last in a world that seemed to eat its own? The question echoed in my mind, taunting me, growing louder with each passing moment. I remember the palpable tension, the whisper of fate hanging over us like a guillotine, poised to drop. We were all so fragile, so human in our fear. And yet, we pressed on, clinging to the thin thread of hope. We trudged through the wreckage, shadows of our former selves, every step a battle against despair. The night wore on, and the realization of our stark reality began to settle in. We were not heroes, we were just soldiers. Average, ordinary, caught in the gears of a machine larger than ourselves. And in that moment, as I glanced at the stars hidden by the smoke, I wondered if they could see us, if they knew our pain. We were mere pawns in a game of giants, and the odds were never in our favor. I could feel the weight of history pressing down on us, the ghosts of those who had come before us, reminding me of the fragility of life. Their stories echoed in my mind, each soldier a thread woven into the fabric of time, each sacrifice a testament to the human spirit, yet simultaneously a reminder of the futility of it all. "Stick together," Garcia said again, but this time I could hear the tremor beneath his words. We were all trying to outlast the darkness, but the odds were stacked against the average soldier, against us. As we moved forward, the shadows stretched and twisted, and I could feel something lurking, a specter of despair, whispering that we wouldn't survive. But as long as we were together, we fought against that whisper, against the night closing in, clinging to hope like a fragile candle flickering in the storm. And so we marched, not knowing what the dawn would bring, but knowing that as long as we had each other, we would stand against the inevitable. The odds may have been against us, but in this moment, amid the chaos, we were alive. And we would continue to fight, not just for survival but for the hope that the dawn would break and with it, a chance for redemption.